And now we would like to welcome to the show the great Dan Gardner. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
It's a pleasure, Dan. I've known Dan for years, and Dan is one of the best of the best. So I'm delighted to have him on the show. Dan, if you wouldn't mind, can you start by sharing your background with our listeners? And if you could, kind of take us back to the beginning. You've had a really interesting career, as I mentioned at the top of my segment. You've kind of done it all. So if you could take us back to the beginning and also what you're up to these days.
Sure. I'll try to give you the Reader's Digest version because, as we said in the green room, it's a 30-minute broadcast. So we need to give a high level. But greetings, everybody. Thanks again, Rob, for having me. It's flattering to be on your show. I'm actually broadcasting, tuning in from right next to the LA Long Beach Port Complex, but come from Massachusetts. I'm from Lynn, Massachusetts. Started in my career in freight forwarding and customs brokerage at my home port of Boston. But the journey from Boston to Los Angeles was not a direct one. There was some circumvention of the globe that went on along the way. So I do come from a customs brokerage and freight forwarding background, worked for Fritz companies back in the day, a truly legendary organization, DHL Global Forwarding, XL Global Logistics. But the big thing for me, and this is kind of a segue into the supply chain portion of my career, the best thing for me, and you appreciate this, we've talked about this before, Rob, is that you get exposure to all types of different industries, importers, exporters, footwear people, medical equipment people. And if you really take the time to listen and go see the factories and see the vendors and see the ports and what have you, it is the best live classroom that there is for a broad exposure, not only to logistics, but trade compliance, supply chain as well. So that's what really, fast forwarding to 2007, started this company called Trade Facilitators, which was built off a network that I built over the years in the 3PL space, in the customer space as well. And we do three things. Basically, BCO consulting. We work with supply chain technology companies, as well as in the trade compliance space. And we have an educational component as well, producing classes, certifications, degree programs for institutions like Cal State Long Beach. I actually taught last night for Cal State Long Beach. So that's kind of been the trajectory along the way. I did become an adjunct professor, a great source of learning as well, and wrote a couple books, and here we are.
Hey, Dan, Dan's being humble. When he said he wrote a couple, I believe it's 6, if I'm not mistaken. But Dan, before you answer, I just want to let everybody know we've got Sarah Essam listening all the way from Egypt.
I saw
we've
that.
also got John Tucker listening from South Africa, and Paul Dunn from Ireland. So we've got a truly global crew today. So thank you and welcome all from abroad. Okay, Dan, so you were saying you wrote a couple of books, and I think by my count, it was 6, if I'm not mistaken. So is that right?
Yeah, 5. But
5, okay.
Maybe we can do the 6th one together.
I would love to do that.
Co-author.
So you do consulting. You skipped a couple of points along your journey. You talked about really kind of learning the business by being in the business. And one of the things that I recall about your journey is you got to spend some time abroad. Tell us a little bit about that.
I did. I spent 13 years in Latin America. Had some experience as a youngster, as an exchange student in Latin America, really interested in Spanish and what have you. So as a young executive working for Fritz companies in Boston, I was transferred to Bogota, Colombia, to be the head fire putter outer on the ground. Spent a year there, was in Miami for quite some time, and then was transferred right after 9/11, tragically, to Guadalajara, Mexico, where I was then working for XL Global Logistics. So I was president of Latin America from Guad and got a real education on the supply chain side because we were dealing with a lot of contract manufacturers, Flextronics, what was then Sanmina SCI, Celestica, HP as a device manufacturer. And what I found was that where I knew a little bit about logistics and air freight and ocean freight and all that stuff, we'd go to meetings with these customers and they'd be using terminology that I just didn't understand. So I decided, and I saw one of your people tuning in has a certification in production and inventory management through Apex. I actually did that while I was abroad. It was I guess you'd call it a correspondence course back then. And literally, I took the test online, but that was about it. But that experience, and I would encourage anybody in the supply chain space to always be curious, always continue to be learning, because the experience I had getting that certification and understanding materials requirements planning and forecasting and sales and operations planning and how logistics fits into that, I think that made me a more effective executive. So yeah, spent some time in Latin America. I had the good fortune, like yourself, Rob, been to Asia, lost count, on the whole China trip thing from Beijing to Shenzhen and back again. And it's that curiosity, that go and see for yourself mentality that really counts in this business.
So Dan, you've gone from learning to teaching. That's a nice trajectory in your career. Tell us a little bit about what you teach. Who are your students and what are you teaching them?
Yeah, well, I started actually when I was in Boston teaching the GED. And I'm talking, I hate to date myself, I was a young man, but it was 85, 86, teaching the GED, the high school equivalency, to what were then in East Boston, or Eastie, as we like to call it, to essentially refugees from the genocide of Cambodia, Pol Pot, wow, as well as the upheavals and revolutions going on in Central America, Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador especially. So I had an interest in education from the get-go. And then in the forwarding space, I just got invited to speak at a couple what were then seminars, when we used to go to a hotel and have a seminar on different subjects, letters of credit, import regs, things of this nature. And then transitioned to a university environment, University of Miami, Florida International University when I lived in South Florida, but currently I'm on the faculty at Georgia Tech, their Supply Chain and Logistics Institute, Cal State Long Beach I mentioned, as well as Long Beach City College. And what I found out was that if you want to be a good teacher, you'd better be a better student, because I was always dealing with, adult continuing education, from MBA programs to certification programs, et cetera. And what I quickly learned is that the first day of class, these students are going to test you. And if they think you're a goof from day one and you don't know what you're talking about, you've lost the group. So by the time you get to class, that should be the easy part. The hard part is in the preparation, which in turn prepares you better. It becomes this virtuous cycle, at least in my humble instance. It becomes this virtuous cycle where you're learning on the job, you're in the field, you're doing all of those things, but also preparing for class so you can keep the audience and make sure, hopefully, that they think they're going to get a good exchange because the professor actually knows what they're talking about. So that's really forced me. You want to be a good teacher, be a better student. And that's helped me a lot.
Dan, that's a great story. And I didn't know that part about when you were in Eastie teaching GED. So thanks for sharing that with me as well. And so one last stop I'd like to make along your journey is you went from being, sort of a 3PL to a teacher to an author, and then you became a practitioner. You became an importer, what you referred to as a BCO, which for those of you who don't know, that means beneficial cargo owner.
Right.
Also called an importer, also called a customer. And tell us about that experience for a little bit. Whatever you can divulge about what you did there would be great,
absolutely,
I think, for the audience. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it was really a fortuitous experience for me from a timing perspective, because I had dealt with BCOs, those beneficial cargo owners, my whole career, and felt that I had a decent feel for their perspective and what motivated them internally, and how they worked with freight forwarders and customs brokers, et cetera. But that experience of a medium-sized importer, school supplies and school furniture, I say fortuitous timing wise, because the organization at that time, we're going back 4 or 5 years ago now, was going from a one warehouse distribution network for the United States that was here in Carson, California, to standing up a 750,000 square foot facility in Kentucky, which of course in any supply chain is going to resonate across the entire supply chain, all the way to relationships with vendors, and got them into things that they had never heard of before. Transload, intermodal, the rail piece, twin driver, double driver, hot shots, the whole thing. So to be a part of the team that set that up from scratch, along with the underlying technology that enabled it, selfishly was a great experience, not only from that operational perspective, but truly understanding the dynamic, for example, between sourcing, purchasing, logistics, who the internal customer really is at a BCO, and what motivates people to behave in certain ways. And it really was a great experience.
That'll be a good tee up to our next topic in just a minute, which is S&OP. But let me ask you just one quick question. Was it surprising when you got on the importer side? I mean, you probably had all these expectations as a vendor to those customers, what things would be like. Any surprises on being on the inside, being actually working for an importer versus servicing one?
Yeah, that's one of the things I like about this industry. There's always surprises about everything that you do. But so, yeah, there were definitely surprises, just the complexity of the purchasing function when you're dealing with 30, 40,000, which isn't a lot in the grand scheme of things, but 30, 40,000 SKUs and doing a couple of hundred new product introductions a year. And what does that mean logistically, starting with a forecast and all of those things? With that said, much of my experience was a validation of things that I had experienced with customers on the 3PL side, but it was obviously on the different side of the table. So it was some surprises that were really helpful, as well as validations of things that I had suspected, and some things that I was completely wrong about. It's the other part of supply chain. If you think you're going to be right every time, it's time to go to barber college, because you're not going to last.
So, Dan, just a quick comment that even though you're sitting in Los Angeles now, you have not lost a lot of the Eastie, as you call it, accent. So that's a good thing.
Yeah, well, don't get me started on that, because I've tried. And of course, I grew up 10 miles from the Garden, Boston Garden. And during my time in Massachusetts, it was Larry Bird and Magic and that whole thing. So I don't really talk much socially here in SoCal, because I just don't feel like listening to it, about the accent. And people think I'm reticent. I'd rather talk on a webcast than to somebody directly at a Starbucks, because they just end up antagonizing me.
Got it. So before we transition to a couple other questions I've got for you, is there any advice you'd give to somebody, based on your journey and the fact that you're a teacher and you deal with lots of young people? Is there any advice that you'd give to somebody who's young and just starting out in the supply chain industry? Any thoughts on that? What kind of guidance would you give to someone starting out today?
Yeah, I think everybody's journey is different, but I'd start out with the underlying philosophy of stay curious, always be willing to learn, but you have to be willing to do the work too. I deal with a lot of younger people, my own kids, and they need to you have to put in the work too. You want to be able to learn, obviously, but you have to create value. You have to find ways to create value. And that's really quite important. That curiosity component should really translate into a lifelong commitment to continuing education. You don't have to go to a 4-year school. You don't even have to get a 2-year degree. You can go on Coursera. You can go on LinkedIn. You can go on YouTube. I know people that we've counseled at Cal State Long Beach that took a certification program in logistics at Cal State Long Beach. And then we coached them into getting their broker's license, customs broker's license, which I am one as well. So I'm biased to that length, but just put together a combination of skills over time that create more value, because global trade, whether it's on a country level, an industry level, a company level, or most importantly, an individual level, you have to be able to compete. And in our business, it's about the acquisition and application of acquired knowledge. That means there's no such thing as a born supply chain person. There's no such thing as a born customs broker. You have to go out, put in the work, gain the experience, work on your game in your spare time, and stay competitive. That
Great advice. Great advice. Yeah. And Dan's got 3 kids, so he knows from experience, knows from what he talks. Mm-hmm. So I want to switch gears if we could. So that, as we talked about, supply chain's been extremely chaotic, I would argue, for the last 5 years, but particularly in the last 2 since the pandemic. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on what's the role of a supplier in the supply chain. We talk a lot about all the domestic challenges we have with getting capacity and getting on the rail and so forth. What do you think about suppliers in the supply chain? What's their role, and how important is their role in this whole process?
Yeah, I think the answer to that question, I think it starts with a true understanding of what supply chain is. And it took me 30 years to figure this out, but I'll give it to you in 10 seconds. So when you think about it, supply chain is about predicting the future and placing bets. What do I mean by that? Predicting the future with a forecast of sales, be they existing evergreen products or new product introductions, and then placing your bets in the form of a budget. How much merchandise, assuming that you're an importer, let's use the Trans-Pacific Eastbound as an example, an importer, you have to convert that forecast for existing and new products into purchase orders that are then placed over time in specific quantities on the vendor. So the vendor, of course, quality product at a reasonable price, that's the price of admission into the game. But they are such a vital player in all these other aspects. So to answer your question, the role of the supplier, in addition to manufacturing goods on behalf of a buyer, is origin, collaboration, and coordination. Simple stuff that you might not think about. The relationship that an origin vendor has with their freight forwarder or the freight forwarder of the BCO in the United States, depending on what the Incoterms rule is. Simple things. Who's going to make a booking for a container? How reliable is that booking going to be? So to answer the question, treat your supplier as a partner, obviously, from a product perspective, but understand that their actions are going to permeate, go up and down the supply chain from start to finish, starting with that purchase order that's placed on a vendor overseas and the many travails that can go on from that moment forward.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. And that sort of leads into the next question I had for you. You introduced me a while ago to the term S&OP. Would you mind defining that term for the audience? We've got about 4 minutes left. Defining the term for that audience and for our audience, and then also explaining what the importance of an S&OP is. I don't think, like me, I think a lot of people weren't familiar with the whole notion of how do we tie all these crazy things together in a supply chain, and S&OP seems like a logical place to start.
Yeah, sales and operations planning, just fascinating to me, and fairly common sense. But my experience has been that the more common sense something is in the supply chain, the harder it is to do. There's an inverse relationship there. But sales and operations planning goes back to this idea that virtually all importers are going to start with a forecast of every item that they sell over the course of a year. They're going to convert that forecast into POs, as we said a moment ago, and then the game is afoot, as they say. Sales and operations planning recognizes that, but companies put together, this is really important, a multifunctional team of representatives from purchasing, from sales, from logistics, from trade compliance, everybody that needs a window into what's going on in the inbound supply chain. And really what they do is they start out with the forecast, but then the year starts to unfold. Some products start selling well, others are on forecast, others are not selling so well. So what S&OP does at a minimum on a monthly basis is to get this multifunctional team together and look at the forecast by product family, by category, wearing apparel versus accessories versus footwear for a fashion company. And they make specific observations. Product A is kicking butt. Do we need to order more? Will we get it in time? That whole bullwhip effect thing. Whereas if a product isn't selling so well, do they back off of a PO? What's the last change date on a purchase order? Can they change the quantity? What's the last ship date? So in the end, S&OP is taking actual results compared with forecasted results. There's always going to be a difference, and making adjustments up or down depending on what you discover in that ongoing process of sales and operations planning.
Yeah, it seems like that every company should do that, Dan. So what do you find in terms of real world? Are a lot of people using that approach?
Yeah, well, kind of. I think people are more in tune to it because of the pandemic and disruptions and this bullwhip effect that, people over-ordered. You mentioned Black & Decker. Target has publicly stated they've overreached, what have you. I think larger organizations that have more resources and more robust ERPs are more likely to do that. But in the smaller organizations where people wear multiple hats, it might even be easier if you think about it, because if I'm the logistics person and I'm in charge of purchasing for a small to medium-sized importer, I'm the same person. So
yeah,
the
you've got both ends of the string. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think more and more companies are doing that. I think software is starting to catch up in terms of the requirements for that capability, because after a while, the whole spreadsheet thing isn't going to cut it. But certainly people have become more in tune to that as a result of all the goings on in the last couple of years.
Okay, so Dan, I'm going to let you go on this note. We've got a question from Mohammed, and he asks if you have any contracting tips.
Well, if Mohammed can elaborate a bit on if it's contracting with vendors or contracting with 3PLs, or we can just take it in general. But what I will tell people, and let's talk about contracting with vendors as an example. And I get a big kick out of things like nearshoring and reshoring and what have you, because Rob, given your experience, you know this as well. It takes a good 2-3 years to have a solid relationship with a vendor. So this notion, and I've seen it a million times in our consulting business, have worked on it, that companies are going to, well, we're going to stop sourcing in China because of the 301 tariffs and it's expensive anyway, and we're going to start sourcing in Vietnam or Mexico. Good luck with that, because first of all, depending on the product that you're importing, it might not be even produced in Vietnam or Mexico. They might not have the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 raw material suppliers in those countries. So let's not get out over our skis on the nearshoring, reshoring story, because it takes time to develop trust-based, operationally oriented, customer-focused relationships. I think there's a future for it, but based on my own experience and working with clients that want to move from somewhere else into Mexico, look before you leap, because there might not even be a cliff to jump off of.
Well, and Mohammed did clarify, he was talking about general contracting terms, but we're out of time. So let me do this, Dan, if I could. Would you mind sharing with this audience your contact information? So if they've got additional questions or they'd like to consult with you on a project that they've got, or just
100%. Should I put my email in the chat or just say what my email is?
If you could do both, that'd be great. Or actually, Kayleigh, if you don't mind putting that in the chat for Dan, I'd appreciate it. And Dan, if you can just say it.
Yeah, so it's D as in Dan Gardner, Gardner, at Trade, T as in Tom, RADE, F as in Frank, ACIL.com. So it's D Gardner at tradefacil.com. And everybody know, well, Spanish speakers know that fácil in Spanish means easy. So Trade Facil, baby.
Make trade easy with Dan Gardner.
Right on.
Dan, it's been a pleasure having you. I wish we had another hour or so, because you've got a fascinating background and we just scratched the surface. But
anytime.
I really appreciated it, and I'm sure the audience did as well. So thank you very much. If anybody needs a great resource for just about anything related to the supply chain, Dan's your guy. Please reach out to him.
Thanks for having me.
Dan, thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.